Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Dr. Halima, and today's lecture is the process of translation. Now, as usual, let's go through the learning outcomes. It's very important to make sure that you come out of this class with clear objectives, with achievements of the purpose of this lecture. You need to show some kind of understanding of the process of translation, and you should show knowledge of the 5 stages recognized in the process of translation. In addition to that, you need to show understanding of the interaction between the elements of translation with the 5 stages recognized in the process of translation. So by the end of this lecture, let's hope you will be happy with yourself, saying to yourself, all right, I have achieved the learning outcomes of this lecture. Now, what we are going to do in this lecture, we will go through the following points. First of all, we'd like to know what we mean by the process of translation, and then we would like to go through the stages recognized in the translation. And these stages, what are they? They are, first, editing the source text, interpretation of the source text, stage number 3, interpretation in a new language, and stage number 4, formulating the translated text, and the final stage is editing the formulation. So we have 5 stages in the process. At the end, I will show you some kind of a diagram demonstrating to you the relationship between the elements of translation and the 5 stages recognized in the process of translation. Now, if we say to yourself, what does really process of translation mean? Now, as you remember, probably some of you would, that translation is, people look at it as a process or as a product. But what matters to us in this lecture is looking at translation, a process. Now, what is a process? It is really a complex cognitive operation, which takes place in the mind of the translator. This operation helps the translator to do what? To interpret and extract meaning from the original text. And what then? And then re-encode this meaning in the target language. In a nutshell, the process of translation is the abstract translating activities that take place in the mind of the translator before the production of the translation of the text. This is really the process. All these operations, all these activities that take place in the mind of the translator before the translated text. You can't see them because they are abstract, but they are there in the mind of the translator. All these activities, operations, but they are cognitive. It means they are there in the mind of the translator. Now, as I said, when the translator starts the process of translation, this process, we can recognize in this process 5 stages. First, editing the source text. Second, interpretation of the source text. Third, interpretation in a new language. Fourth, formulating the translated text And the fifth one is editing the information, or editing the formulation, or editing the translation, or editing the translated text. Now we will take each stage separately to enable you understand what we mean by these stages. All right? So I'm going to slow down and try to make it clear to you as simple as possible. Now look at the editing process. Now editing the source text is the first stage. What is editing? Editing is the study of the source text. Why? To establish what? The authorship and the authenticity of the text. And then we reach a linguistic form which is accepted for translation. Now, this means this editing process is very important in case of what? In case of inscriptions, in case, for instance, if you happen to discover on archaeological site a stone, and there is some inscriptions on it, some writing, and you say to the translator, please, I would like to translate this from a Roman, or from Latin, or from Sanskrit, or from a Pharaoh language, you know, whatever you call it. You say, okay, we want to know what they mean by this text. But before you offer it to the translator, because the translator might not be involved in this process. Why? Because it needs to be confirmed that this piece of text, or this piece of information, is authentic, it has an author. So this editing process, first you need to make sure that it is authentic and it has an authorship. Now this editing process, of course, precedes translation. Now when does the translator get involved in this process? Only if you say to him, okay, we have this tape, we have this cassette, we would like you to translate it. So what he does, he really starts, you know, interpreting this particular cassette, or particular reading of the cassette, or listening to the cassette. Now when this stage, the editing of the source text, has been edited and adopted for translation, it means when it is confirmed that this text, the source text, is authentic, is fine, we are happy with it, we have checked it, it's complete, then the translator starts what? Moves to another stage, which is the stage of the interpretation of the source text. So this is the first stage. You check the source text is authentic, is original, we know who did it, and if it is on a tape or a cassette, okay, the translator just translates what is recorded, but make sure that you understand that this editing process stage is before translation, precedes translation. Now when you have achieved all this, and you have made sure all this is edited according to what I've said, then the translator moves in to start the second stage of the process, which is the interpretation of the source text. Now let's move to this second stage. interpretation of the source text. What do we mean by interpretation of the source text? It is really giving. You look at the text and you need to give the text a meaning. You give the text a reading so that you reach an interpretation of the text. Now, this process of assigning meaning to the text really depends on the linguistic system of the language you are using. In addition to that, you have to give the specific meanings in a constructive process which involves the linguistic analysis of what? Of the text, like symbols, scripts, sounds, and grammar, and so on and so forth. This newly built message of your interpretation then finds its way to a new stage, which is the interpretation in a new language. But you have to understand that this interpretation of the source text is really the translator's personal and individualistic approach to the translation. It means it is more or less personal interpretation, subjective. So we cannot avoid that. But I would like you to understand that the interpretation of the text is mainly the translator's unique understanding of the text concerned. So this is very important to understand. Now, but when it comes to text like religious text or literary text, now the translator really need to refer to other sources to help him interpret the text properly. This is a very important stage. All this happens in the mind of the translator. Interpretation means assigning meanings. You read this and I say to you, please explain to me. So you say, all right, I think it means this and that. This is what it means by interpretation, really. He assigns, he gives meanings. Like somebody might say, okay, what is your reading of this text? Like in Arabic, let's say, كيف تقرأ هذا السؤال أو كيف تقرأ هذا النص. It is the same. So I would listen to your reading to the text. It means to your interpretation of the text. So I hope this is clear. I know it is a bit abstract, but this is put in a very, very simple way to you. Hopefully it would be clear. Now, stage number 3. Now, after you have edited the text and you interpreted the text, you move into another stage, which is called the interpretation in a new language. So you need to put your interpretation in a new language, really. And what is interpretation in a new language? It is defined as the transformulating, to transformulate a linguistic or verbal text after interpreting it. Means to transformulate means to take it from one language to another language, really. Instead of transform or transformulating, it means to transfer in a different form. This is a newly made. You might not find it completely in the dictionary, but it is made for this particular context. Transformulate means to take it from one language into another, or from one interpretation into a new interpretation. And this transformulation is carried out by who? By the translator. And this transformulation carries really the fingertips, you know, and the fingerprints and the fingertips of the translator himself, because it is very unique to his own personality, his own abilities, his own capabilities. And what would he do them? He would do them in a new language, interpreting them in a new language. Now, very simply, this interpretation in a new language is really the translated text. It's the new text, the product. You know? So, but you have to understand that the most important part of this stage is the movement, means the crossing of the translator from one language into another. Now he is editing, he is interpreting in one language. He's editing the Arabic, for instance, let's say a text very, very old. If you want to say to me, okay, I would like to translate this text, and it is probably 1,000 years old, I myself might not be able to translate it. I say to you, okay, we need to add it, to check it, that it is, for instance, it belongs to, let's say, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah or Ibn al-Jawzi. Okay, now this text has to be checked and made sure that it is authentic, original. Then you start interpreting this text, and then after you reach assigning meaning to this text, you start your interpretation in a new language, you put your interpretation in a new language. So this crossing from Arabic into English is called the interpretation in a new language. And this is the job of the translator. And this is what makes this stage special. Now, stage number 4 is formulating the translated text. All right? Now you need to move the Arabic territory into the English territory. If you are translating from Arabic into English, or if you're translating from English into Arabic, then you have to move from the English territory to the Arabic territory, so that you come up with what? With the lexis and the structure of the new language that would give meaningful context to the new text. Formulation is really a composing operation. A composing operation that subjugates the interpretation of the translator of the system of the target language. This process subjugates means makes, force the translator to what? To use his interpretation for the benefit of the target language system. So if you are translating from English into Arabic, then you have to use your composing operation to help you put your interpretation in a new language from English into Arabic text. This stage, it doesn't happen like this, but it takes time. It happens gradually, bit by bit. And this stage gives you an idea what kind of translator he or she is. In other words, it shows you his or her interpretive abilities. How good is he to interpret this text? How good is he to give meaningful context to this new text. So when you look at the formulated text, you say, all right, well, the translator has done a good job. Why? Because it means he understood and he interpreted the source text very well. That's why I can see that this formulation of the translated text is fine. So you need to be able to identify this. Okay. So this is the stage number 4. It is in a new language because you have already left here what it says. It is and the results of the translator's interpretive leap from the source text to the target language. As I said, leap, it means to jump, it means to cross, it means to say goodbye English, hello Arabic, goodbye Arabic, hello English. I am here with you and I'm going to really do the formulation of the text so that English speakers would understand this new translated text. All right? So this is stage number 4. Now, stage number 5, what is it? It is editing the formulation. It is the final stage, or number 5. This stage, the translator starts the editing process. And to be honest, it's not only in translation. When you write anything, at the end, before you submit it to your teacher, to whoever, you need to really edit it, to check, make final checks, polish it, say, okay, is it ready to go or not? Are there any discrepancies? Are there any inaccuracies or any there pitfalls, or so on and so forth? Now, regarding this particular translated text, when this process is complete, then the translator starts his editing process. What does he do? As I said, takes the form of a careful checking of possible slips of the tongue or other inaccuracies. If you are translating a verbal document, a verbal text, you need to make sure that there are no slips of the tongue, no mistakes in your speech. If you are doing a written text, then you have to make sure that the text is void of any inaccuracies. It means any wrong things you have committed in the translated text, really. So you need to check step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to make sure that it is perfect, and you need to make a final check that, okay, the linguistic aspects of the source text, are they really equivalent to what is happening in the new translated text? The cultural context, the linguistic context, all these factors you need to check before you submit your translated text. So these are the 5 stages recognized in the process of translation. I hope that by now they are clear to you. Now, the final stage of our lecture today is to show you the relationship between what? Between the elements. Let me give you this slide, perhaps you can see what I'm talking about. Now look at this. This is the final stage, but it's a very interesting point. Why? Because it really summarizes the last lecture. You remember the 6 elements of translation I gave you last time, and the stages of the stage recognized in the process of translation. Now let's look together at this diagram. Look with me and try to understand what I'm talking about. Now, this line shows the elements of translation. What are the elements of translation? Somebody might ask you, okay, you are a translator, or you are English language teacher. Okay, what are the elements of translation? You say, well, number one, the source language. This one, look. Source language. Let's take Arabic and English example, okay? Let's say, okay, the translator A would like to translate from Arabic into English. So Arabic is the source. Arabic is the source. English is the target language, all right? Now, source language, this is Arabic. Now you say to me, okay, I have this text. I have this poem, Arabic poem. I would like to translate it from Arabic into English. This Arabic poem is the source text. Now the third element, we need a translator to do this text, to do this translation. You see? Now this is the element number 3. Then as a result of the translator dealing with the source language and with the source text, we have translated text. The translator will produce a translated text. This translated text has some kind of a language of translation of its own. A language of translation of its own and of the target in a target language. So we have these 6 elements. All right? These 6 elements of the translation. Then you ask me, all right, what's the relationship between these elements and the 5 stages recognized in the process of translation? Now the 5 stages, as we have explained earlier, we have this one, editing the source text. This stage number 1, as I said earlier, you make sure that the text you want, the source text you want to translate is edited, is checked, is made sure that it is authentic, it is original, and you know the author and blah blah blah. Now the second stage is interpretation of the source text. When the editing is complete, then the interpretation of the source text starts. Now interpretation of the source text happens before translation. Then what happens after the interpretation of the source text? When you interpret it in a new language. Look. And then this a new language is happening when you need to formulate the interpretation, then you edit the interpretation. But look, here, look this arrow, editing the source text goes to the source language. Of course, you need to check with the source language. And editing has something to do with the source text. Do you understand? Source text, source language, editing the source text. So there is always a link between editing what? Editing the source language, the source text. Then from the source text, you get interpretation of the source text. Look, this arrow goes to the interpretation of the source text. And the interpretation, who does the interpretation? Well, the translator does the interpretation. You see, interpretation of the source text by the translator, source text, source language. Then, when the interpretation takes place, then the translator says, all right, now I have to put it in a new language. This interpretation of a new language goes where? Between, look, the translator's interpretation language, translated text. So the translated text, the interpretation in a new language has to be materialized in a translated text. You see? this interpretation in a new language between the translated text. The translated text, what is it? It is really the formulation of the interpretation. You know? So the formulation of the interpretation is really the translated text. It means the product. It means what you have translated. It means the English text. The poem is the English text now. And the formulation goes to the target language. So the formulation of the interpretation should be in the target language. In other words, the formulation and the translated text should be in English if you are translating the poem we agreed upon. You know? Now, look, translated text, formulation of interpretation, this is a product, this is process. You know? So the relationship between the two. And then the formulation of the interpretation has something to do with the target language. And the translated text with the target language as well. It means with the English language. Now, after that, look at the editing. The editing of what? Editing the formulation. Editing what? Editing the translated text. Editing the formulation. Editing the target language. It means the poem you have translated into English, you need to edit it. You need to see whether there is any inaccuracy or any problem or any mistakes or any errors. So this is the end of the process. Now, look at it and try to imagine it, try to study it, and try to practice it. So I hope this diagram summarizes this lecture and the previous one. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.